On July 23, 1965, a signature changed what Americans carried in their pockets. Lyndon Johnson leaned over a desk and signed the Coinage Act, and with a stroke of ink, the silver dime and the silver quarter began to die. For more than a century and a half, an American coin had been a small ingot of precious metal. Now it would become something else entirely, a sandwich of copper and nickel, worth far less than its stamp denomination in raw material. The change happened quietly, in the language of legislation, but its effects rippled through every cash register, every vending machine, every child's piggy bank in the country. Consider the ordinary dime. Since 1837, it had contained 90% silver and 10% copper. You could hold it, feel its weight, and know that the metal itself carried value independent of any government promise. That physical fact had anchored American money since before the Civil War, before electric light, before the automobile. Then, in a single decade, it vanished. Why would a stable, trusted metal suddenly abandon everyday currency? The answer was not conspiracy, but arithmetic. By 1965, the price of silver on world markets was climbing toward a critical threshold of $1.29 per ounce. Above that line, the metal inside a silver dollar would be worth more than $1. When that happened, the coin stopped being money and became a commodity, worth more melted than spent. The government faced a slow catastrophe. Its own coins were about to disappear into furnaces and hoarders, vaults. This is the story of how silver left American money, and who understood the transformation early enough to profit from it. It involves rising industrial demand, a shrinking treasury stockpile, a nationwide coin shortage, and a small circle of dealers and speculators who bought bags of coins by the thousand. To understand why the metal fled, we must first understand how deeply silver had been woven into the very definition of an American dollar, stretching back to the founding of the Republic itself, when the nation first decided what its money would be made of, and how much precious metal each coin would faithfully contain. The story begins in 1792, when the young United States passed its first Coinage Act and built the Philadelphia Mint. The new nation needed money it could trust, and it chose to define its dollar in physical metal. The act specified a silver dollar containing 371.25 grains of pure silver, roughly the weight of a Spanish-milled dollar already circulating across the Americas. From that moment, an American coin was not merely a token. It was a measured quantity of precious metal, guaranteed by the government's stamp. Gold coins existed too, but silver became the metal of everyday life, the coin of the marketplace, and the wage. Over the following decades, the standard settled at 90% silver and 10% copper for the dime, quarter, half dollar, and dollar. The copper hardened the alloy so coins could survive years of pockets and counters, but the value lived in the silver. When you paid for bread with a quarter in 1850, or in 1900, or in 1950, you handed over a small piece of the same metal traders weighed in London vaults. This physical honesty shaped how Americans thought about money. A dollar was not an abstraction printed on paper. It was something you could bite, weigh, and melt. Even paper currency reflected this. Silver certificates, issued from the 1870s onward, carried an explicit promise. The bearer could redeem the note for silver dollars on demand. The paper was a claim check for metal held in treasury vaults. For over 170 years, this arrangement held remarkably steady. Through Civil War, industrial expansion, 2 world wars, and the Great Depression, the silver in American coins remained constant. Generations grew up assuming their money had intrinsic weight, that a handful of change was also a handful of metal. But this stability depended on one fragile condition. The price of silver had to stay low enough that the metal inside a coin was worth less than the coin's face value. As long as that held, coins stayed coins. The trouble began when silver stopped cooperating, when industry and markets started pulling the price relentlessly upward toward a line no government could hold forever. After the Second World War, silver was no longer just money. It was raw material for a booming industrial civilization. Photography devoured it. Every roll of film, every X-ray, every photographic print depended on silver halide crystals. Kodak in Rochester consumed enormous quantities each year. The new electronics industry needed silver for switches, contacts, and solder because no metal conducted electricity better. Silverware, jewelry, mirrors, dental fillings, batteries, brazing alloys, all pulled from the same limited supply. Through the 1950s, world demand for silver steadily outpaced new mine production. The gap was covered by drawing down existing stockpiles, above all the vast reserves held by the United States Treasury. As long as that metal flowed into the market, the price stayed pinned. But industrial appetite kept growing. By the early 1960s, analysts watched a widening deficit between how much silver the world used and how much it dug from the ground. The markets in London and New York registered the pressure. Traders knew the arithmetic. There existed a critical number burned into every calculation: $1.29 per ounce. At that price, a silver dollar contained exactly $1 worth of silver. Below it, coins were worth more as money than as metal, and they stayed in circulation. Above it, the equation inverted. A dime, a quarter, a half dollar would each be worth more melted down than spent at face value. Every fraction of a cent the price climbed brought that reckoning closer. For years, the government had held the line by selling Treasury silver at a fixed price, flooding any shortage with metal from the vaults. This kept the market price below $1.29 and kept coins in pockets. But it was a defense that consumed ammunition. Each ounce sold to suppress the price was an ounce gone forever from the national stockpile. The strategy worked only until the silver ran out. Sharp observers, metals traders, economists, a handful of coin dealers could see the trend lines converging. Demand rising, supply strained, stockpile shrinking, price pressing upward. The danger line loomed. The only question was how long the Treasury's vault could hold before the numbers forced a decision no one wanted to make. The United States Treasury held one of the largest hoards of silver on Earth, accumulated over decades and stored in gray vaults. This metal was the wall holding back the flood. For years, the Treasury sold silver at the fixed price of $1.29 per ounce to anyone who wanted it, a policy meant to cap the market. Whenever industrial buyers pushed the price up, they could simply purchase from the government instead, and the price fell back. It was a dam and it was working, but it was leaking metal at an accelerating rate. The mathematics were brutal and simple. In the early 1960s, the Treasury was releasing silver at a pace of tens of millions of ounces per year to satisfy the shortfall between world demand and mine supply. By 1961, President Kennedy grew alarmed and ordered a halt to certain silver sales, trying to slow the drain. But the underlying deficit did not vanish. It only meant the market price would eventually break free. Officials could see the end of the reserve approaching. The stockpile that had once seemed inexhaustible now had a countdown attached. Meanwhile, the mint faced an impossible position. It needed silver to strike hundreds of millions of coins each year for a growing economy. Every dime, quarter, and half dollar demanded 90% silver by weight. But the metal for those coins came from the same shrinking supply the industrial world was fighting over. The Treasury was, in effect, competing with itself, consuming silver to make coins while spending silver to hold down the price of silver. As the price crept toward $1.29, the trap closed. Once the market crossed that line, the newly minted coins would themselves become melting targets. People would gather silver coins, take them to refiners, and sell the metal for more than the coins, face value. The entire coinage system would hemorrhage into furnaces. Government economists ran the numbers and reached an inescapable conclusion. There was not enough silver to keep making silver coins to fend the price and supply industry all at once. Something had to break. And as officials wrestled with these equations behind closed doors, the American public was already sensing the shortage in the strangest of ways. Coins themselves were beginning to disappear. By 1964, something felt wrong at the cash register. Merchants across the country reported the same baffling problem. They could not get enough coins. Dimes, quarters, and half-dollars grew scarce. Banks rationed rolls. Vending machine operators struggled. Store clerks begged customers for exact change. A nation of abundant pocket money suddenly seemed to be running dry, and no one could quite explain where the coins had gone. Part of the cause was ordinary growth, a booming economy with more vending machines, more parking meters, more transactions demanding more coins than the mint could produce. But something darker moved beneath the shortage. As the price of silver climbed toward the melting threshold, ordinary Americans began to suspect that their coins might soon be worth more than face value. Rumors spread from newspaper columns to barbershops. People started holding onto their silver change, pulling it from circulation and stuffing it into drawers, jars, and safes. Every coin hoarded was a coin that never returned to the register, and the shortage fed on itself. The mint responded with extraordinary measures. Production was pushed to record levels, running presses around the clock. To discourage collectors and speculators from hoarding coins by date, the government froze the mint date. Coins struck in 1965 continued to bear the year 1964, so that no particular year would become a scarce collectible worth saving. Mint marks were removed as well, stripping coins of the small distinctions that made hoarding attractive to collectors. Officials publicly blamed the shortage on coin collectors and hoarders, urging citizens to spend their change and return coins to circulation. But the deeper truth was that Americans were behaving rationally. If a quarter silver might soon be worth 30 cents, why spend it as 25? Suspicion had become financial instinct. The government understood that the coin shortage was not merely an inconvenience. It was the first visible symptom of a system breaking down. As long as coins contained silver climbing toward $1.29 an ounce, no amount of frantic minting could keep them in circulation. The only real solution was radical: to remove the silver entirely, to sever the coin from the metal that had defined it since 1792. That decision was about to be made law. On July 23, 1965, in a ceremony at the White House, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Coinage Act into law. The stroke of his pen ended a tradition that had survived since George Washington's presidency. From that moment, the dime and the quarter would no longer be minted from 90% silver. In their place came a sandwich, 2 outer layers of copper nickel bonded to a pure copper core. The half-dollar was granted a reprieve, dropping only to 40% silver, a compromise struck to soften the political blow. Johnson understood the anxiety spreading through the country. Americans feared that the new coins, worth far less as metal, would somehow be inferior, that their money was being cheapened. So the president spoke directly to that fear. He promised that the old silver coins would not disappear, that they would circulate side by side with the new clad pieces for years to come. He declared there was no reason for anyone to hoard, that the government held ample reserves. He even pledged to use the Treasury's stockpile to keep the price of silver from climbing above the fatal line of $1.29 per ounce, the point at which a silver dollar's metal became worth more than its face. The new clad coins carried an ingenious design feature. Their edges revealed a reddish copper stripe, a deliberate signal so that the public and vending machines could distinguish them. Yet the coins were engineered to weigh almost exactly the same and to trigger the same electromagnetic signature, so telephones and transit turnstiles would accept them without complaint. It was a triumph of metallurgy over economics, a coin that behaved like silver while containing almost none. But Johnson's reassurances rested on a fragile assumption, that citizens would behave rationally, spending old and new coins alike. He was betting against human nature and against a law of money older than the Republic itself. Within months, the silver coins he promised would circulate freely began slipping quietly out of cash registers and pockets. They vanished into coffee cans, dresser drawers, and bank vaults. An economic principle first named in the 16th century was about to teach America a harsh lesson. The principle was called Gresham's Law, named for Sir Thomas Gresham, a financier who advised Queen Elizabeth I in the 16th century. Its logic was brutally simple. Bad money drives out good. When two coins share the same face value but differ in metal content, people spend the cheaper one and keep the valuable one. It had happened in ancient Rome, in Tudor England, and now, in the 1960s, it was happening across the United States. The mechanism unfolded exactly as economists had feared. A silver quarter and a clad quarter both bought the same cup of coffee. But the silver quarter contained metal creeping toward, and eventually past, its face value. Rational Americans handed over the clad coins and quietly set the silver ones aside. The good money, the silver, was pulled from circulation. The bad money, the copper-nickel clad, stayed in motion. By the late 1960s, the transformation was visible in any handful of change. Pre-1965, dimes and quarters grew scarcer month by month. Merchants noticed. Banks noticed. And a growing army of ordinary savers began sorting their pocket change at kitchen tables, plucking out the silver by date. Then came the melters. As the market price of silver finally broke above the old $1.29 barrier, coins became worth more destroyed than spent. Refiners and speculators bought coins by the canvas bag, $1,000 face value bags weighing over 50 pounds, and fed them into furnaces. Each melted coin returned to the market as raw bullion, erased forever as legal tender. The Treasury, watching its own careful engineering unravel, would eventually make coin melting illegal for a time, but the flood could not be stopped. The nation had split its currency into two invisible categories. There was money you spent and money you hoarded. There was the coin in the register and the coin in the safe deposit box. The silver dime, a fixture of American life for 173 years, was quietly disappearing into private hands, not through theft, but through the cold arithmetic of value. And a small number of people understood this arithmetic better than anyone. They had seen it coming. And they were buying. They were not bankers or industrialists. Many were coin dealers working from modest shops, bullion speculators reading commodity tickers, and ordinary hoarders with a knack for numbers. What united them was foresight. Long before the melters arrived, they understood that silver coins would soon be worth more as metal than as money, and they acted while the coins still spilled freely from bank tellers' drawers. Their method was patient and unglamorous. They ordered silver coins by the bag, the standard $1,000 face value sack, containing roughly 715 troy ounces of pure silver once refined. In the mid-1960s, such a bag could still be obtained near face value from banks eager to unload heavy coins. The speculators simply asked for silver dates, hauled the bags home, and waited. Some dealers advertised in numismatic magazines, buying pre-1965 coins at slight premiums and stockpiling them in warehouses and vaults. Others cultivated relationships with grocery chains and armored car companies, skimming silver from the daily torrent of change before it returned to circulation. It required no genius, only conviction. The belief that the price of silver, held artificially at $1.29 by the shrinking Treasury stockpile, could not stay pinned forever. The mathematics rewarded them. As industrial demand rose and the government's reserves emptied, the fixed price collapsed. By 1967 and 1968, silver broke free, climbing to $1.80, then $2 and beyond. A bag of coins bought at $1,000 was suddenly worth $1,500, then $2,000 in raw metal alone. The pocket change of a nation had become an investment portfolio. Some of these men grew wealthy quietly, selling into each price spike. Others held on, convinced far greater gains lay ahead. Their patience transformed the humble dime and quarter into something the mints had never intended, a speculative asset traded by weight. But the story did not end with private profits. The government itself was still unwinding its old promises, the last threads connecting paper currency to the silver in its vaults. Those threads were about to be cut, and when they were, a decade of extraordinary price spikes would follow, redefining money for every American. On June 24, 1968, the final tie between paper and metal was severed. That was the last day Americans could redeem silver certificates, the paper dollars once marked as payable in silver, for actual metal from the Treasury. For decades, a citizen could carry such a bill to a government window and receive silver in return. After that summer day, the certificates became mere paper, indistinguishable in value from any other dollar. The promise printed on their face had quietly expired. The consequences of that severance played out over the following decade. Freed from any obligation to trade metal for money, the government watched silver find its true price on the open market. Industrial demand kept rising. Speculators kept accumulating. And by the 1970s, the metal that had once been fixed at $1.29 an ounce embarked on a spectacular climb. In 1979 and into January 1980, driven partly by the Hunt brothers' attempt to corner the market, silver rocketed toward nearly $50 an ounce. The old coins Americans had tucked into drawers were now worth staggering multiples of their face value. A single pre-1965 quarter contained metal worth more than $8 at the peak. The bags the speculators had bought near $1,000 were suddenly worth $35,000. The pocket change of the early 60s had become a fortune, and the melting furnaces roared once more. But the deepest transformation was not measured in dollars. It was philosophical. For 173 years, an American coin had been a small piece of precious metal, its value resting in the substance itself. You could hold worth in your hand. After 1965, and finally after 1968, that connection was gone. The dime became a token, a symbol backed only by the faith of the government that issued it. The nation had crossed an invisible threshold, one it could never uncross. The silver had drained from the coins, from the certificates, from the vaults, leaving behind only paper, base metal, and trust. What replaced the silver was an idea, fragile and powerful in equal measure. Money became a promise, not metal.